What's going on YouTube? This is going to be the software side of the Hackintosh build. What you want to do is head over to TonyMac86.com. Going to log in. If you don't have a login, you're going to go ahead and create an account, register. It's free. You're going to need this to download some of the items. After we log in, we're going to go ahead and go to the install guide. We're just going to follow some of the prompts. So first things first, what we'll need to do is go into the App Store. And we're going to go ahead and download straight from the App Store our software, which in our case is going to be El Capitan or El Captain. I'm going to press download and then continue. And go ahead and enter in your password. You are going to need a actual Mac to do this. You could actually do it also off of a Hackintosh, but you need already OS X software. And you can save your password for next time if you want. It's up to you. After we're done, I'm going to go ahead and create a USB drive in UniBeast. So what we'll do is you'll pop in your thumb drive and we'll go over to Disk Utility. Now in Disk Utility, you're going to go ahead and click on it and we're going to partition it. Now in our case, 16 gigabytes. So we're just going to call it USB. And for the format, OS X Extended Journal. Let it do its thing. Let's make a partition of it, naming it what we need it to be named. And then when it's done, you can press done, and you can exit out of Disk Utility for now. Next thing we want to do is start download a couple of alternative files after we do our software. So one is Multibeast, and obviously get the latest version of Multibeast because they do change, but we're doing El Capitan, so we're going to pick El Capitan. We also want to download the latest version of UniBeast. I already have that downloaded, and I already have Multibeast downloaded. Another thing that I would recommend is you download the Nvidia Drivers, and I'll go through that in a little bit. So I'll go ahead and open up UniBeast and let it do its thing. Find the USB drive that we plugged in and named USB. Continue. We can go with El Capitan, UFEI mode, and then we can skip that part. And then this is what it's installing. Go ahead and put in your username, password, administrative password, and let it do its thing. This part should take a little while, so be prepared to go make some coffee. You're going to see some files pop up. I sped this up pretty fast. Some files are going to pop up, some files are going to go back down. It's going to do its thing. Just don't touch it, let it do its thing. I would not recommend letting anybody else touch it either. And then it's going to put a whole bunch of folders and then take them all away. It's moving. But like I said, I sped this part up pretty fast. This part took me, I would say, maybe 30 to 40 minutes. It's all going to be based off of your USB drive, to be honest, which I would recommend a 2.0. Some people have had success with 3.0, but some people haven't, so just keep it simple. Alright, after that's done, I'm going to go ahead and quit. And then now we have to drag over our Multibeast and our Nvidia drivers. And I do the Nvidia drivers now just because, so you don't have to download them later. Don't really matter, you can download them later, but the link for the Nvidia driver would be in the website, but you could also get that off Tony Mac. After that, we're going to go ahead and eject. And that is it for the USB part. Alright, now it's time for the hardware. What you want to do is first install the CPU. To do that, you lift this little arm that houses the CPU, lift it up. What you want to do is go ahead and grab your CPU. Try not to touch the top, or try not to touch the components on the bottom. Now, the way you know how to measure it up is there's a little triangle on the bottom, and there's a little triangle on your motherboard. So just go ahead and match both of those up, and you simply just drop it. Don't really need a lot of pressure, just make sure all the landing ports are lined up. And then you'll go ahead and close the lever door. The black piece will pop out. It's perfectly normal. Give a little bit of force, make sure it's gripped in there. And that's it for the CPU. Next, we're going to install our RAM. Now for us, we went with 16 gigabytes of Ballistic Elite DDR4. And the channels that we're going to use are these two. Now if you were going to use all four, obviously you would use all four. But for us, since we're only using two, we're going to leave a space in between one of them. Your motherboard will tell you which slots to use first, so just make sure you take a look at that. It's pretty easy, it only lines up one way, and push it in until you hear it click. Do the same for the second one. Like I said, we're leaving a space. Until you hear it click, and you'll be fine. Perfect. Now we got our CPU and our RAM installed. We're going to go ahead and mount the CPU bracket so that our CPU cooler can be mounted. And to do that, you just line up the prongs on the back. Now this comes with your CPU cooler, and you'll go ahead and install the screws associated with it. They call them standoffs. Sped this part up a little bit for you guys. After you have your CPU standoff screws, you'll go ahead and then put your CPU cooler on. Some people like to do this after, some people like to do it before. It just depends on, positioning in your case and how hard it really is. I did it before. I wish I would have did it after. To save some time. It was a little bit harder to get the CPU cooler in the tray than it was, just because of the length that it gave me. But after you install all the appropriate screws, go ahead and plug it into the CPU and plug the cord into the motherboard. Next, we're going to install the I/O shield. Very simple. Just pop it in the back. Make sure it's facing the appropriate way. Then we can install the motherboard to the actual case. And there's standoff screws already built in for this case. There's an ATX motherboard and an ATX case, so the 9 screws are already in the associated spots. So you'll just lower your motherboard into the I/O shield and then on the standoff screws. And then once everything is lined up, you'll see that all the 9 standoff screws line up with 9 holes in your motherboard. So then you'll put the appropriate screws inside of that. And I'll speed this part up shortly, just so we don't have to watch me put in screws. Just make sure it's nice and snug. Everything fits perfectly fine. Start the screw process. Like I said, I'll make it a little bit fast for us so we don't have to sit here and patiently wait. Now your case or your motherboard might be different, so just obviously make sure you check your screws and your standoffs and make sure that they're in the right spot. Some cases you have to put your own standoffs in. However, luckily this one had it already for me. Then next you're going to go ahead and mount the CPU fan on the actual top. This one is an all-in-one radiator. So we're going to go ahead and mount it to the bracket at the top, which I could have done multiple but one is sufficient enough. I do plan on overclocking, but not to the extreme, so one is more than enough for me. Go ahead and get that in. Make sure that's all plugged in afterwards. There's a CPU fan. Next we'll be installing our power supply. Pretty simple. 4 screws in the back, make sure it's lined up. I would recommend you actually install a couple of the cables that you need to. Some cases make it a little bit difficult to get into after your PSU is installed already. Then this part I'm going to definitely fast forward. This is installing all the CPU wires, the headers, the USBs. I would say this is the most unpleasant part of doing a computer, but it's the most necessary part if you want everything to work. So you'll go ahead and install all of this. And last 2 things we're going to be doing is taking up these brackets in the back. One is going to be for the Wi-Fi / Bluetooth dongle antenna. The one that I did purchase was highly recommended on the Tony Mac website, and I didn't have to download any drivers or anything like that for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to start working. It actually automatically worked, so nothing special in that sense. Whereas other ones you have to download drivers. Not that they don't work, it's just a little bit more tinkering you have to do. This one worked very simple right out of the box. Plug and play. So I do highly recommend this one. But like I said, there's no right pick for this. There's just multiple you can choose from. You just choose whatever one is suited for your budget and suited for the ease of use for you. This one I found very easy to use for me. Next is going to be our GPU. So we went with the 970 from GIGABYTE. This one's the overclocked edition. And this one was also recommended by the community over at Tony Mac. It's a pretty good GPU. I could have went up for the 980 Ti, but I was already pushing $1,500–$1,600 with this build. A lot of the other parts came in a little bit more pricier than I was expecting, but thing's a beast and it looks like a monster. So we'll go ahead and install the CPU. This also goes in the motherboard, has a dedicated PCI Express slot for it. And then after this you'll mount it to the back and then you'll put in some power. The power, like I said, goes directly from the graphics card into the power supply. The good thing I like about this case is that they have grommets on the inside, and it's very easy for you to, keep your wires very nice and clean and organized. So this is the hardware part. We are pretty much done in this aspect. Give it our boot and it worked. Just doing little final touches up on the wiring, and then we will shortly go over to the software side. So what you want to do is power up the PC, and upon powering it up, you want to press delete to get into your BIOS. After you're in the BIOS, what we're going to do is go over to save and exit, and we're going to click load optimized defaults, and then we're going to press yes. We're then going to go to BIOS features, and for our boot option, we want to make the first one boot off of our SanDisk or USB drive, whichever USB drive you ended up going with. Ours is called the SanDisk, so we're going to go ahead and make that our primary boot drive. We're then going to go ahead into our peripherals, for handoff, we're gonna enable it, and we're also gonna go down to Super IO Configurator, and we're gonna go ahead and disable that. We make sure that our BT-D is disabled. Some computers have it, some computers don't. Check your motherboard profiles and stuff. And then under BIOS features, we are also going to go down. I have so many boot options. I have a lot of hard drives. You guys are probably not going to have as many boot options. What we want to do is go to Windows 8/10 features, and we want to click into it and put it on Other OS. And then for the storage boot option controller, make it U. And then we want to save and exit. After we save and exit, since we did select our boot option to boot off of our thumb drive, it should automatically boot right into what we need it to. Perfect, so there's the Clover screen. And I apologize for the next part, the quality. But what we want to do is go into the boot options, and right over here we're going to press enter, delete all of this, and we're going to go with NV, like Nvidia, _ disable equals 1, and then enter. Then we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom and press return. And then we're going to go ahead and boot from USB. So this one's called external. After it goes ahead and loads off of the actual drive, it will take a few minutes, and then you'll be prompted with this screen. Now before we do anything and actually continue with the OS X install, we want to go ahead and format our hard drive. So go to Disk Utility, and we're going to go down and find our actual hard drive. In our case, it's the Samsung SSD. And we're going to go and press Erase, and we're going to rename it Hackintosh HD. Make sure everything's spelled correctly and capitals are all there. And then Extended Journal. And after it erases, then we can press Done. We can then exit out of this. And then we want to start the installation. So we're going to go ahead and continue, continue, agree. We're going to pick Hackintosh HD, continue. I skipped across this part so we don't have to wait too long, but this will take approximately 13 minutes in our case. So after it's done, it's going to go ahead and give you the restart option. And then after it restarts, we'll go ahead and get the Clover screen again. Give it a couple seconds, it's loading. So what we want to do again is go into our boot options, go down to this menu, the ARGS, and do the same thing, NV _ disable equals 1. And then enter, and then scroll down to the bottom again to return. And what we actually want to do now is boot from the actual SSD, which is going to say HFS, I believe. And after we boot the first time, this is going to be like the initial launch of OS X, so it's going to take us to the actual OS X installer. It's doing its thing. Almost done loading. This part should look familiar to some of you who have ever owned a Mac before. I'm going to go ahead and install and go ahead and pick your Wi-Fi if you went with the same adapter as me. If not, you might have to configure some settings. You might have to plug it in directly. Ethernet. But like I said, this Wi-Fi adapter out of the box worked very well. And I chose don't transfer anything. I chose enable Mac. I skipped this part, sign in later. Agree, agree. Create a profile name. Make a password if you choose to. Next. I disabled diagnostics because this is not a real Hackintosh and we don't want developers thinking their programs don't work on the real deal. Setting up the keyboard is pretty simple. So press the key to the right of Shift, which in our case is Z, and then the one to the left, which is question mark. And this is the install. The next thing we want to do is open up our USB drive, and we're going to run the Multibeast. So this is why we had dragged it in there earlier. And then we're going to go ahead and open it. And at the top, we're going to do Quick Start. I'm going to click top option. Then we're going to go to our drivers. In this case, we have the driver from ALC 1150. And if you're not sure, you can go over to Tony Mac's website and click on motherboards. And typically the motherboard, hopefully you chose one from the site. Not necessarily, you don't have to, but if you did, most of the motherboards tell you what audio drivers you have right there. So in our case, we have the UD5TH, and ours is the ACL 1150. I'm going to go ahead and check that. Then we're going to go to the next option. None of that stuff under it is what we needed. But obviously you install your appropriate drivers for your hardware. Everybody's hardware could be different. You don't necessarily have to use this. So just go through the menu options, seeing if there's anything else that we could install. But I believe in our case it was just that. So then we'll go over to the next screen and make sure that the Clover boot mode is installed. And then we're going to go to build, and at the bottom right we're going to do install. Let it do its thing. Press agree. Enter your admin password that you set up in the beginning. Should take a few moments depending on how much stuff you have to install. Alright, the install was successful. Another thing we want to install, which is why I had us pre-downloaded earlier, is the Nvidia Drivers. Seeing how we are going to be using a dedicated graphics card. Go ahead and just open up the file that we downloaded earlier, run the program, next, put in your password, and then next. After this one's done, it should ask us to restart the computer. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and restart. Now after we restart, you could actually at this point pop out your USB drive. It should boot into the Clover screen automatically. As well as we do not need to disable NV in the startup screen. However, if yours does not boot, I would recommend you still boot with NV _ disable = 1 until you figure out why your graphics card is not working. Now this actually happened to us. Some people don't have this issue. Some people, it actually takes it and memorizes that code. What we ended up having to do after is go into Clover and have it boot up with a memorized Nvidia driver startup screen. So you'll see that this one just boots up, but then stick around a little bit after and you'll see that how to actually fix your Nvidia driver after. So we'll let this one set up real quick. And if you hear some squeaking in the background, it's my dog. She's playing with her chew toys right at my feet. All right, so this is like I said, this one. But if you're having issues with your drivers, what you're gonna go ahead and do is just go straight to Google and type in Tony Mac Clover download, and then downloads, and then you're gonna click on the Clover Configurator download. I already downloaded it, so we're gonna go ahead and then open that up. And what you need to do first is mount it. So at the left, you're going to see Mount EFI. And then you're going to go to the bottom right where it says Mount EFI Partition. Now you're going to pick your drive. Now in my case, I have two SSDs and I also have thumb drive in. So if you only have one drive, you're only going to see one. And then we're going to open, double click in the EIF folder. I'm going to go into Clover. We're going to go into Config plist. Now at the top where it says boot, we're going to go ahead and check NVDA underscore DRV equals 1. Then we're going to save. And after we save, then you could reboot. Now this is going to allow your dedicated graphics card to actually remember to start up with, you know, Hackintosh when you actually start it. So after you restart, everything should be good after that. And that is how you do your Hackintosh. But we'll go ahead and just get to the main screen just to make sure everything is working properly. And you'll know that your drivers are not installed if when you do put in your password you get a whole bunch of lines through it or a whole bunch of glitchiness. And you could also check under About to see if your computer is actually reading the graphics card and your other hardware too as well. Now separately I'll make a separate video and I'll have some benchmark tests on the Windows 10 side, and then also some benchmark tests on the actual OS X side, you know, so you can get a comparison and see how this monster performs to computers using similar hardware on the Windows side. So in my case, in the Clover, I can choose between Windows 10 or OS X. And we'll go ahead and pop in our password. And there's no lines, no glitchy. And we can always go to About This Mac. And right there it says under graphics, it's reading my 974 gigabytes. So if you guys like this video, please let me know. If you didn't like it, please let me know. And please share with all your friends. Don't be scared to build a Hackintosh.